With that said, it looks like we're just jumping right into working some bills here on some final actions. So looks like committee, we will now take up 2595, House Bill 2595 for consideration. So I call on the reviser to describe the bill for us, please.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, if you remember, House Bill 2595 makes certain certificate of title procedures for antique vehicles applicable to vehicles with a model year of prior to or after 1960 rather than 1950. If you're titling an antique vehicle under KSA 8-170, you can use a bill of sale with the application. And certain actions are taken. For one, if the model year is prior to 1950 with the bill of sale, you do not have to have a KHP inspection. If the model year is 1950 or later, then a KHP inspection is required with the application and bill of sale. This bill would make that year applicable to 1960, so those prior to 1960 wouldn't have to have an inspection, and correspondingly those with model year after 1960 would have to have that inspection. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, are there any questions for the reviser at this time? Representative Proctor.
Thank you, and thank you, Chris. What is the difference in fees between titling with and without a title, by bill of sale?
Other than potentially a fee for the inspection, there isn't a difference in the title fee.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any other questions for the reviser? Seeing none, Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we pass out HB 2595 favorably.
Committee, do I have a second? Representative Proctor, I just seen you first. Sorry. So the floor is now open for any discussions on the bill. Seeing no discussions, Mr. Hoheisel, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I close.
Okay. Committee, you've heard the discussion. What is your desire on the bill? Pardon? I know, I'm getting there. So all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Looks like the ayes have it. Okay. Now we are moving on to, looks like 2529, authorizing the Board of Education. I'm sorry. Which one? My bad. I had another paper show up here. Sorry about that. Well, hold on. Hang on. Okay, gotcha. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Committee, we are now taking up 2596 for consideration. So I call upon the reviser to describe the bill for us. Thank you.
Sir, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, House Bill 2596 authorizes the Board of Education of the school district to contract with transportation network companies, TNCs, to provide transportation for 8 passengers or less to and from school and school-related activities. The TNC Act would govern these types of transactions, which that act requires certain insurance and applications and qualifications for drivers. The Contract between the school district and the TNC may also establish additional requirements beyond the TNC Act, and shall also exclusively govern these with the Act. TNCs are required to have their drivers who perform these transportation services for school districts to undergo a criminal history record check pursuant to KSA 75-712I. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, are there questions for their advisor, Representative Hoheisel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chris, for that breakdown. Is there anything in this bill that requires a school district to do anything?
Mr. Chairman, no, the language is just that they may contract with the TNC, so it's no requirement.
So
It's
no
just an
school
option.
district would be obligated to contract with them. It's a option if they.
That's correct.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Representative Jacobs?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Chris, was there any indication in testimony on how much it would cost the school districts if they did do this?
I'm not aware of that testimony. What I could say is that through the bill, that would most likely be set in the contract with the school districts.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for the revisor? All right, committee, the floor is now open for any discussion on 2596. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have an amendment.
Are we passing it out? Okay. While he's passing it, would you like to describe the amendment, please?
Certainly, committee, we heard testimony, proponent and opponent testimony when we heard this bill. In some of the opponent testimony, the proponents, the folks at the TNC in question, reached out to try to craft something to help ease the concerns of the opponent. And this is kind of just putting some of that language into the legislation. So it adds a section: the Department of Education, and consultant with the TNC that will provide services pursuant to this section, may issue guidance to the school districts contracting with the TNC to provide transportation services. And the adds paragraph D that a TNC that provides transportation services pursuant to this section shall provide an annual safety report to the State Board of Education for any safety instances that occurred in the previous calendar year.
Okay. Do I hear a second on the amendment? Representative Neely. Okay. Committee, any discussion on the amendment? Okay. Seeing none, would you like to close on your amendment?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Committee, again, this is just a good faith effort by the proponents of the bill to try to ease some of those concerns. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will close.
Okay. Committee, you've heard the amendment offered by Representative Hoheisel. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Sounds like the ayes have it. Let's see. Anybody wish to have their votes recorded? Okay, then we are back onto the bill, 2596. Further discussions? Okay, Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. When I first read this bill, I thought it applied only to some large municipal school districts. And in reflection, some of the most recent federal guidelines concerning CDLs have affected some of my smaller school districts. And this might be a way of alleviating some of their problems. I have 23 school districts and 18 superintendents within my house district. Some of them are very narrow and yet extend 25 to 35 miles from the school. They occasionally on their bus routes run Suburbans to bring kids to and from school in small numbers. And I think this bill might provide a little bit of flexibility for those particular school districts. And I thank you for bringing it up.
Representative Hoheisel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're still speaking on the bill, correct? Or still speaking on the bill?
Yes.
Okay, yes. I kind of want to reflect what Representative Minnick said there. This is a great opportunity, especially for smaller school districts. And as a father with two kids who are currently in Wichita Public Schools and use the public transportation through the school district, looking at the safety requirements that the TNC has, I mean, it's, their criminal background checks, driver history records, at least 19 years old, valid driver's license, insurance, national and local sex offender database check. I mean, I'm more than comfortable trusting these with my kids. So with that, I will be supporting this bill as well.
Representative Howe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just had a comment. In my district, the school district serves as kind of a hub or a co-op for providing special education services to a lot of rural school districts. I am aware of one student who travels an hour and 15 minutes to Salina so he can receive the special education time and attention and services that he needs. And his home district pays for a small bus to drive him that long distance each day. So a service like this can fill in the gap, and I stand in strong support of giving parents and districts this type of option. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, committee, what's the desire of the committee regarding House Bill 2596? Representative Hoheisel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass HB 2596 out as amended favorably.
And I see a second from Representative Neely. Thank you. Yeah. Committee, all in, I'm just making notes. Sorry about that. Committee, all in favor of passing House Bill 2596 out favorably, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Sounds like the ayes have it. Very good. Okay.
Committee, I apologize for being late. Appropriations ran over. So anyway, next we'll take a look at House Bill 2609. Revisor Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, House Bill 2609 allows 15-year-old restricted driver's license holders the ability to drive directly to and from the worship service of any religious organization. It follows kind of similar allowances for restricted license holders that are 16 and over. I did just want to note that for passengers in the vehicle that was brought up during the hearing, any restricted license holder less than 16 years of age isn't allowed to drive the motor vehicle with non-sibling minor passengers, and that continues as is under this bill. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Other question, Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't want to beat a dead horse here. I just want one more time the clarity that when we're defining religious worship service, we're including all religious activities, not just the main church service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, by keeping it's broad enough that any religious worship service would include other activities. I did check to see if the division interprets that. As I said, I borrowed this language from similarly from where it is elsewhere in the statute, and they interpret it the same way.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does the place where the religious worship service Does it have to be the church? So it's if it's a religious activity that's off church site, does that qualify?
Mr. Wagner?
Something like a church camp or something like that.
Give him a moment to find that.
No problem.
So, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking up the exact definition of religious organization. It just refers to an organization, church, body of communions that has an established place of worship with meetings at least once a week. I think that just goes more to the definition of what the organization is. I don't think it necessarily requires it to be in a set location.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may follow up. So if I am a part of St. Anne's Catholic Church in Wichita, which I'm going to shout out my church. So since I'm a member of that, but they're doing a off-site event for teen youth groups at, let's say, the local pizza shop down the street, but it's a sponsored religious event through the church, would they be covered here?
Again, any worship service, it would depend. I would think yes, that could be considered. I know it's maybe beyond that definition, or maybe beyond what that term is commonly. But I think any worship service could include activities for a religious purpose.
Would you think that if we put in or any religious related activities, I think that may be too broad if we're doing religious related activities. If you think that this covers it, that's fine. I just want to make sure that it's not just you can only drive to church and back, because a lot of churches do off-site events as well.
Thank you, Sharon. And ultimately, I guess it doesn't matter what I think. I hate to say that, but it ends up being who interprets this. And as I said, I did check with the division, and they interpret that as all religious activities right now. But happy to try and just make that any more specific.
You matter to me, Chris, and what you think matters to me. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Allard, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I want to follow up on that because I have 2 emails that asked me that, and I said, I'll ask tomorrow. We specifically state here worship services. So if I go to, like, say, CYO and the kids go there, that's not a religious service. It may be sponsored by my church, but it's not a religious service. And that's what they were like pointing out, So I think worship is where the problem is. If you say worship services or one day a week, that's normally you go to church one day a week, but you could go on a Wednesday night if your church had a church service or whatever. Mine only meets on Sundays. So I guess I don't see that as saying you can go to anything that your church is sponsored as a worship service. That's getting it very broad.
Is that a question for the reviser or?
Yes. Well, I'm looking at you on it, Mr. Chairman, but yes, when you say you're interpreting that to mean this, but I see worship, and if you look up the definition of worship, that's more your church. And if it met twice a week, you would meet it. But if the organization was just meeting, I'm not sure that would be a worship service.
Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the interest of, I agree with what you 2 previous representatives were saying. That might be a little sketchy on words, but why don't you just say church-sponsored event and be done with it?
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the appropriate time, I would like to draw up a conceptual amendment to reflect pretty much that.
Mr. Wagner.
So could you restate what and I just want to draw the committee's attention. Like I said, this does match language for restricted license holders for age 16 and over. So if we change this one, then we most likely need to change the other one to match if you're wanting to capture all those activities, I assume for everyone 15 and up.
Representative Hoheisel.
Sure, I would like to actually just withdraw my request for a conceptual amendment because I believe to get the exact wording right, it's going to take a little bit of time. So if this comes up on the House floor, I may have an amendment prepared for that.
Representative Proctor.
I have no comment if he's withdrawing his amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Hello, colleagues. I just want to, while we are discussing this, I want to keep in mind that for Native Americans, we have worship services that start Saturday evening and they go into Sunday, and they're all-night church services throughout the state. It's the Native American church services. And so I just want to keep that in mind if you're including all religion and worship services. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Wagner, would that be, they would all be included is the way I would see it, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, we would keep, any amendment would keep that term religious organization, which is a very broad term that would capture most.
All right.
services.
Thank you. Representative Hoheisel. No, you didn't. Okay.
And I would agree with that because it's church services. Yeah, I think that's where the hang up was. And I can appreciate Representative Hauser offering that other one because I saw that and that's how my constituents were reading it as church services. And some people have church service on Wednesday night. They have it on Sunday, so they do it twice. Some will have it, as you heard from the representative, a whole day going into, another day. But they were all services, okay?
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I don't think services there it's directly saying that services are only held on Sunday. So I think any religious worship service would include, my church, Catholic Church, we have services on Saturday night. We have services Sunday, as Representative Helgerson pointed out the other day. We have every morning, Catholic Church has a service. So I think the wording of that covers the actual services. My only drawback is, the Sunday schools or the other activities that a religious organization puts on in lieu of the actual worship service. So again, I may offer an amendment on the House floor, but in order to move it along today, I won't.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I worked with Representative to help draft this bill, we did check with law enforcement ahead of time. We checked with the chiefs of police as well as the Sheriff Association, and there were no major objections to the bill or the bill language. I guess it is already kind of a difficult thing for them to enforce in a way. So I would like to keep the language as broad as possible. I have heard from other members that are interested in offering an amendment as it relates to school activities. I would certainly welcome that on the House floor, but I think it's best to keep the language as is. Thank you.
Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this needs to be taken in the same context as the remainder of this bill. When we're talking about to and from school, there's also the clause in here that says to and from school activities, or to and from a job, or to and from farm work. To be honest with you, in rural communities, there's a lot of 14, 15-year-olds driving around with a list in the glove box that says 4 5/8 nuts, 3-inch or bolts 3 inches long with nuts. I think it's necessary that we leave this up to law enforcement to be subjective on how they enforce it, because if some kid's honestly doing something they shouldn't be, they can have remedies there, but there still should be a little bit of freedom to accomplish other things.
Representative Hoheisel.
I would like to point out, in respect to the previous representative, the current language says a restricted license issued under the subsection shall entail a licensee who is 15 years old but less than 16 years old. And as far as schooling, the only thing it says is on days while school is in session, the most direct route and accessible route between the licensee's residence and the school of enrollment for the purpose of school attendance. So school-related activities are not actually in there for the 15-year-old. And that's what the Representative Howe was pointing out earlier, that a 15-year-old can drive to and from school with a restricted license, but if he's going to football practice or band practice, those wouldn't necessarily qualify under this.
Thank you for pointing that
For the
out.
15
I was in the 16-year-old category. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, it's fine. And, I completely understand out in Western Kansas, you probably have a lot of 14 and 15-year-olds driving, and they're probably a lot better drivers than some folks in Wichita.
So committee, what's your pleasure on this bill? Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we pass out HB 2609 favorably.
Second by Representative Proctor. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, you may close.
Close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Hoheisel to pass House Bill 2609 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. I'd like to move on to House Bill 2628. Supervisor Wagner, when you can sort through all your stuff, we'll let you brief us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee House Bill 2628 expands the definition of reckless driving to include anyone who operates a vehicle at 100 miles per hour or more. Definition is added to the current definition of reckless driving, which is any person who drives any vehicle in willful or wanton disregard for the safety of persons or property. So this just kind of adds another element to what can be considered reckless driving. Exceptions provided for activities under or operation of vehicle under KSA 8-1506, which is certain allowances for authorized emergency vehicles. Penalties and fines are also provided in this statute in subsection B, and those remain unchanged. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the revisor. The current definition, any person who drives any vehicle in a willful or wanton disregard for the safety of persons or property, couldn't driving 100 miles an hour in a residential area or driving 100 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, where cars are present, couldn't that already fit under that definition?
Revisor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it could. I think, we heard testimony that with a combination of other factors could certainly meet the definition as it is now, but this would just make it more specific in those situations.
Thank you. I'll have more comments when we move the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for the revisor? Seeing none? Representative Helgerson.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we pass out House Bill 2628 favorable for passage.
Is there a second? Representative Hoheisel seconds. Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I'm going to oppose this bill. I feel like the current definition already covers a lot of the situations that were testified to here in the committee by our conferees, and I absolutely respect their service and respect the tough job that they have protecting our citizens, protecting and serve our citizens. So I don't want that to in any way imply that I don't support our law enforcement 100%. But to me, there's a difference between somebody driving 100 miles an hour on I-70 at 2 in the morning when there's no cars on the road, which should be a violation and should be ticketed generously. And if person caught and somebody driving 100 miles an hour in a school zone. And I think that the current statute already provides plenty of discretion for this, for that. And I don't want a law enforcement officer in that 2 in the morning situation to feel bound that he has to arrest that person to haul him off to jail because we added this clause to the definition of reckless driving. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further comments or questions? Representative Ballard.
And thank you. I'm going to support this one because it says a speed of 100 over 100 miles, whatever that speed limit was. So it's not just 100, it says or more along those lines. I think that he explained that part of that is you can be fined, but you don't get anything more serious than just a fine. And I think he was wanting more for that in terms of safety for other people driving, for his highway patrol people driving. And of course, there is more to do if you're speeding in a school zone. There's a big fine for that, and all of that. So I think it's covered, but not really. He said more the fine, and this would allow them to take more action for that. So for those people that's going 100 miles an hour, they knew they were speeding. Thank you.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have the deepest possible respect for the previous representative, but I think in this, that once I would like to correct one statement that she said. This bill does not say in 100 miles per hour in excess of the posted speed limit. It just has a flat number. If you're doing 101, you're getting arrested and hauled off to jail if we pass this bill, regardless of what the posted speed limit is. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the revisor. Is it a mandatory arrest in this for going 101 miles an hour?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So under the penalties section, subsection B, I'll just go ahead and just walk through that one. It says upon a first conviction of violation, the person shall be sentenced to not less than 5 days nor more than 90 days imprisonment, or fine not less than 25 nor more than 500, or both such fine and imprisonment. So there are certain discretion. And then for second and subsequent, it's person shall be sentenced to not less than 10 nor more than 6 months imprisonment, or fined, or both. So I don't think it's a mandatory arrest or mandatory jail situation, but it would be something in the court's discretion.
Make sure I probably voted on this. I was confused for a second. Okay, thank you, Mr. Revisor.
Representative Ballard.
Case, with all due respect to the previous speaker, if we would look at this, would you please read the part about what is it says with 100 miles an hour?
Revisor.
So it's any person who operates a vehicle at a speed of 100 miles per hour or more. So there's no tie to a posted speed limit. It's anything 100 miles per hour or more.
Thank you. That's what I said. So I'm not sure what the problem is. I think the problem is one of us is for it and one of us against it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess this is a question for Chris. Did you say it doesn't require a minimum 5-day jail term?
Advisor.
Yes, that's correct. It would be in the court's discretion, depending on the circumstances.
So I'm not a lawyer. To quote my friend, Representative Mason, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not bragging. Do you remember that? He says it much funnier than I do. When it says shall be sentenced to not less than 5 days, it doesn't really mean not sentenced to less than 5 days. Or more than 90 days.
Supervisor.
Or fined. Oh, okay. That's the trick. If you can't pay the fine. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not a lawyer. We can really tell. Um, I guess as I'm trying to decide what to do on this bill, I know a good lawyer can get you off of a lot of things. And I think this just kind of seals down the discretion that the court has on whether it's reckless driving or not. If it's over 100, it's reckless driving. I would think that without this in there, it's somewhat open to the court when the officer makes his determination on whether it's to be considered reckless or not. So I think it's how you feel about the 100-mile-per-hour limit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to clarify, first of all, I apologize to the representative if I misunderstood what she said. I was no way trying to disparage her. But there's a difference to the point of arrest versus imprisonment. There's a difference between arrest and imprisonment. What I am concerned about is that an officer who spots somebody doing 100 miles an hour, if we pass this, would feel compelled to charge that person with reckless driving. And as we heard testimony from from the conferees when this bill was heard, the procedure for a violation of that grade in the misdemeanors is to arrest and arraign the person and, release them on bond based on whatever the judge should decide, and then call them back for trial, at which point there would be a determination during sentencing whether they got jail time or the fine. So there's a difference between the imprisonment clause here and the procedure of arrest and arraignment when the officer catches somebody doing it. And I believe I heard more than once the conferee say that they would be arrested and arraigned if they were caught doing 100 miles an hour or more. And I think that's excessive in some situations. That's why I oppose the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is going to be considered this is for the revisor. The way I'm reading it, it's a misdemeanor, correct? Except there's one exception in here. Is that the way I'm reading it?
Yes, that's correct.
And what's that exception?
Those pertain to CDL licenses. I can look up the exact exception, but yeah, that's an exception for CDL purposes.
So what it's stating is that if you have a CDL license, not just a standard Class C driver's license, but a CDL, and you operate the vehicle in a willful, wanton disregard for the safety of others, or operate the vehicle in excess speed of 100 miles per hour, then that becomes a felony. Is that what we're saying?
No, there's nothing that would make this a felony. It's just, I think it's saying except as provided in case 8-2, which provides certain CDL disqualifications, revocations, cancellations. I think saying for those certain cases, they would be taken out of this statute, and that statute would apply. So that's for CDLs. Violation of this section is a misdemeanor.
So in any case, any way you're looking at it, it's still staying as a misdemeanor, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You done? Okay. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, I remember what I was going to say now. I just wanted to address not the previous before him. The way I understood it, asking, because I share your thoughts there. I don't want overcharging. I don't want folks being arrested and hauled to jail, and if they're on the turnpike and they're going 100 and a 75, because quite frankly, I like severing with Representative Hauser, and I'd rather be him here than in jail when he's in his Hemi. the way I took it, there were several other factors when I was questioning law enforcement on this. I think it was Colonel Jones there, that there were other issues at play, not just the speed. There were other several factors they take in, like alcohol and stuff like that. So I didn't necessarily get the feeling that they're automatically going to take them to jail for going 25 miles and over. I'm not sure what the whole process looks like, but that's just the interpretation I got. But I share your thoughts on I don't want them hauling people just for the fact that they're going 25 or 30 miles and over to jail. So with that, I will be supporting this bill.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heard a comment earlier from the good representative from Seward County. Had mentioned this could give clarity to the courts. Now, if that is the case, then perhaps we should refer this bill to the Judiciary Committee to evaluate that from a judiciary standpoint. But I'm not convinced this bill would increase public safety, the punitive levels of fines or imprisonment and things like that. So I think if the question is, do we want to give clarity to the courts? Perhaps we refer this bill to Judiciary Committee. Thank you.
Representative Seibert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and very good discussion on this bill. I agree with Representative from that's hollering across the room there. I find it hard to support this because I trust our law enforcement. I think they do a good job, and you can arrest, the way I understand, anybody at any time you want to for any violation, because we had 4 people arrested in our hometown for expired tags when they even had the stickers. So I think they can arrest anybody anytime they want to, according to the sheriff in several counties I talked to. If they're going over 100 mile an hour and they're drinking, I think that has arrestable right. I think just because you're breaking the law, because I agree, you can be going 25 miles over the speed limit in the city. I drive through Wichita a number of times. It's like NASCAR going down the highway, and there's always an accident. So I again agree. I think we're over making this too much for the law enforcement officers to make informed decisions at that time when they're there. They're the ones that are there. They're the ones who know the extent of that circumstance. So I will not be supporting this bill also.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a broken record today with that. So I kind of want to address one point though. Right now, current law is any person who drives any vehicle in willful or wanton disregard for the safety of persons or property. That's pretty subjective to, the law enforcement officer at the time. It is, I think, in the broad scope of the statute that an officer can already determine that a person that's driving 100 miles an hour is driving in a wanted and willful way and arrest them according to some, the views of the statute. So I think having 100 miles an hour takes that subjectivity away and kind of just as Representative Francis points out, I think it adds a little more clarity to it.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you. I think testimony we heard where people were doing 220, they could be doing 150, they could be doing, we're talking about if you're saying 25 over, but what about those people that were doing 200 or the people that were doing 150? I mean, that's not 25 miles over. I think there was more the extreme cases that I got the impression they were trying to do something about, not just the person who was barely just there, but what about the extreme cases? Okay, that's what I'm reacting to. I don't think anybody should be driving unless you're on the speedway 200 miles an hour.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree wholeheartedly with the previous representative. I think that 203 miles an hour or whatever the number was that was testified to is wanton, willful and wanton disregard for the safety of persons and property. My contention is that that's already covered in the statute. We don't need to add a speed limit, a speed above which it's automatically that. So that's why I'm not supporting the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further discussion? Representative Delberdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got some concerns here as well. A couple of years ago, I was sitting in a different committee in corrections. We heard a bill concerning squealing tires, and it wasn't exhibition of speed. It wasn't doing big smoke shows. It was squealing tires, and it's the bill to me stunk to high heaven. I envisioned someone leaving a parking lot, cement parking lot, hitting some gravels, barking tires, and by golly, it's a misdemeanor now and an arrestable offense. And now I'm looking at this. I'm just thinking, Kansas Turnpike speed is 75 mile an hour. 100 miles per hour is a 25 mile per hour above that. So I'm going to say it's not as dangerous. I'm not saying it's not dangerous, but not as dangerous, and doesn't warrant going to jail as compared to someone doing 100 miles per hour through a 60 mile an hour speed limit zone in a city. That's a whole different thing, or an uncontrolled access highway. So some states, for example, South Dakota, have posted speed limits of 80 mile an hour. Texas, for example, has 85 mile an hour. And I believe the Muskogee Turnpike going to Oklahoma is posted at 85. For some reason, I can get on the Muskogee Turnpike and for 2 hours at a shot, set my cruise control at 90 mile an hour and nobody blinks an eye at me. And apparently that's safe. But a person hitting 100 mile an hour for a short period of time here in Kansas possibly looks at jail time, losing their job, losing their income because they're put away for a while. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment. Chris. You got colored ones?
As they're passing that out, would you care to explain your amendment?
Yes. While the Chris is passing this out, what it does is take that 100 mile per hour barrier out of there, and it changes it to 40 miles per hour over the posted speed limit. So if I'm in a 60 zone and I'm doing 100, that's dangerous. And it's still taking that in consideration. If I'm on the turnpike, not that I ever would, but I know I've seen my speedometer jump up above the posted limit here and there, and I've never felt threatened or scared. So with that, I'd be open to questions or discussion.
Need a second.
Second.
Second by Representative Francis. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the maker of the amendment. How did you settle on 40?
I'm glad you asked that. I think we all received an email from Jill Shelley, and it had different laws in different states. And I looked through it, and I think our revisor will attest. I've had some arguments with him in a fun way. I appreciate all your help, Chris. I really do. But we went back and forth and back and forth. And the one with the 40 mile per hour above posted speed limits, I believe that came out of California. But I looked at Connecticut, New Hampshire, California, Indiana, and I think Utah was in there too. And that one to me felt right.
Mr. Chair, if I may, so we're going to craft laws over what California is doing?
Absolutely.
No, I actually have it here. It's actually Florida, which is fine. So we'll go with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Yeah. Sent out. It was sent out.
I believe they all have that, Michelle, that I did share that. Questions? Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question. I very much appreciate the Vice Chair's attempt to thread the needle here and try to do something that this does make more sense than the bill that we were initially presented. But I have some philosophical issues with taking that discretion away from the officer on the ground and from the judge. You know, I believe every trooper vehicle has a camera, you know, that would come to court where the judge could see what was going on when the trooper made the arrest. So I'm going to continue to oppose this bill. I'll probably vote for the amendment though, because it's better than what we had to begin with. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Representative Howe.
Chairman,
Representative Hobson.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for the reviser and also for the vice chair. Is it not federal law that if you're actually traveling over on Turnpike, if you're traveling over 10 miles over posted speed limit, is there like a law that says that you can only do that on a federal level? Per se, is there a law that actually says that if you're on the Turnpike or if you're on federal, like a federal interstate, you can only go 10 miles, like 10 miles over from the posted speed limit?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not aware of any law like that. I can look into if there is, but yeah, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, I thought there was like a buffer per se in regards to that. You know, drivers are allowed to go like 10 miles over what the posted speed limit is on Turnpike. So my question would follow up to the vice chair as to if this particular law was to go, where amendment was to go on per se, does that actually not interfere with federal law per se? That's my question to the vice chair.
Okay, and this is Vice Chair Delpernang, if I may jump into that. Representative, I think you're referring to that. I believe there's a 10 mile per hour, I'm going to call it an amnesty, that does not go buffer that does not go on to your driving record. They can still write you up at 2-3 miles over. It's their prerogative, but I believe there is an amnesty, if you would, as far as permanent record, up to 10 mile per hour if it's on a 4-lane divided highway. If it's 2-lane, I think it's 5 mile an hour.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, that was my question. I mean, I know how well, that was my question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Howe, did you have another question?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't have a question, more of a comment.
Okay.
So I'm having a hard time figuring out if this bill intends to increase public safety or if it's a matter of trying to give clarity to the courts. I drive back and forth from Salina to Topeka twice a day. Well, it's a round trip every day. I don't stay in Topeka when we're in session. And there are a lot of people that speed and violate the law. I wonder if it's more of a question of enforcement. How well are we enforcing the current laws on the books? And so if the question is, do we need more staffing for highway patrol, the highway patrol or something like that? I'd be interested to learn more about that and how we can appropriate and allocate resources across the state to increase public safety, because I see cars zipping by me the whole way here and the whole way back, and so I just want to pose that comment to the committee, something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments or questions? Representative Helgerson.
I'm going to oppose the amendment, and I made the motion because I guess first, the reason for the 100 miles is safety. All statistics show that the faster you go, the more deaths you're going to have, period. Now, with this amendment, and going 40 miles an hour, in my community, that would make it 60 miles an hour and you'd be throwing somebody in jail. And in Eastboro, I don't think you want to be thrown in jail. I think it comes down to the officers brought this together to us because they're trying to save the lives. The 100 miles an hour is also a threshold. Everybody understands that. You go 100 miles an hour, you're likely that you're going to go to jail. And I don't care which road you're on. 100 miles is not safe on the roads because it's not a posted speed. And people that are out there driving are 15 or 20 miles an hour slower than you are. And you may think in a stretch of the turnpike, I can go 100 miles an hour and nobody's going to be in my way. But really, you're going to find somebody that's moseying along at 65 or 70 miles an hour, and suddenly it's going to appear over that ridge and you're going to have an accident. Now, I travel minimum of twice a week, and I regularly see people that have been pulled over, and not because of the highway patrol, but because they've been in an accident. So the reason this was brought to us is because it'll save lives. 100 miles an hour is also a nice threshold. Everybody knows that that's something you shouldn't cross. And if you cross it, you're going into a different type of problem. And you may more likely you're going to go to jail because the officers then have a threshold of where they're going to put you in. A pretty clear threshold. So that's why I'm not in favor of the amendment. That's why I'm in favor of the bill.
Same Topliker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this bill apply to just highways? I know we've asked this question before, but I just want to refresh. Is it only highways or is it all streets like residential also?
Revisor?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is in the Uniform Act regulating traffic on highways. So, and highway is very broad since so it includes streets and roads as well as interstates and.
Okay, because, all right, thank you.
Representative Francis.
Another question for the revisor. So do cities have the authority to modify this under their home rule authority if they want to?
I assume it's in their standard traffic ordinances. They usually adopt what's in state law, but I can look into that further.
Representative Topliker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up, you know, some of the highways do run through the towns or cities. And would this still be in effect for that part of the highway that runs through the town? Or would, say like a city, or would city laws supersede this? For example, a highway is in a rural area is coming through a small town. The town has a speed limit of 25 to 30 miles an hour through the town. And so with this, with this amendment, someone would be reckless driving doing 60 miles an hour, right? If the speed limit was 20, if they're doing 60, it would be considered, they would be guilty of reckless driving under this amendment. And I think that's a lot better than driving, waiting till the person hits 100 miles an hour through the town to be guilty of reckless driving. So I would go along with the amendment.
Further questions? Comments? Seeing none. Representative Delperdang, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Rep. Topsker, I appreciate your comments, and with Rep. Hilgerson. But I was going to point out to Rep. Hilgerson, if I may, that whether it be a small town or Eastboro, with the amendment, somebody going through there at 80 mile per hour would be, or I'm sorry, through there at 60 mile per hour would be 40 over the limit and therefore subject to the rules. Without this, I could hit Eastboro at 95 mile per hour, and apparently that's safe. It would be a 100 mile per hour marker. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I do close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Delperdang to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The noes appear to have it. Division's been called for. All those in favor, raise your hand. And those online, you are in the building, I take it, then I need to have your vote. I'm sorry, I wasn't able to hear you.
Oh,
No.
I'm a no vote.
Mr. Chairman, I'm also a no vote on that. I just raised my hand, see if you could see me. I'm a no vote. Sorry.
Okay,
I'm a no vote.
thank you. Let's count. I beg your pardon? Yes, I do. So it'd be 6. 6 noes. 10 yes. 11 yes. 11 yes. The amendment passes. So we're back on the bill as amended. So we're back on the bill as amended. Are there further discussions? Representative Hoheisel, I believe you made the motion initially. Would you care to renew your motion as amended?
Let's see. I got it here. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out HB 2628 favorably as amended.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no.
No.
I beg your pardon. We're going to have to go back. I don't know who the second was on. It was Representative Neely. So we're going to revote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
The noes appear to have it. Division's been called for. All those in favor, raise your hand, please. Okay. Opposed? How are the 6? Those online, can we get your vote, please?
Yes.
My vote was a yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I have 9 voting for and 6 against. Motion passes. Okay. Representative Proctor, what's his vote recorded? Representative Hauser, wants his no vote recorded. Representative Seibert wants his no vote recorded. Representative Jacobs wants his, were you aye? Yeah, it was nay. Representative Delperdang wants his recorded as a yes, as a no, as a no. Representative Proctor and Representative Howe. There was more now. Where'd they come from? Yeah. We'll move on to House Bill 2630. Reviser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee House Bill 2630, which we heard yesterday, would establish fees for the transportation of certain radioactive materials through and within the state, and establishes the Radioactive Materials Transportation Operating Fund. There are certain terms defined for radioactive materials, including a term for who qualifies as a shipper. And the shipper is the person who contracts for the transportation by truck or rail of those radioactive materials. The bill goes on to list certain fees that should be paid to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment due before the shipment begins. Fees will be deposited into the newly created Radioactive Materials Transportation Operating Fund, which fund can be used for inspecting, escorting, planning, waste shipments, coordinating emergency responses, education, training, and supplies for local emergency responders, paying administrative costs for state agencies that are incurred through that agency's involvement in this program. It goes on to require advance notification. It's actually already required by federal law to the governor's designee of high-level radioactive waste, transuranic waste, spent nuclear fuel, or highway route controlled quantity shipments before entering the state. And notifications of low-level radioactive waste are provided to KDHE and Division of Emergency Management. There are also certain exemptions, certain materials exempted from these fees in this program, such as state-funded colleges, low-level radioactive waste meeting certain criteria, or material shipped by the federal government for military and national defense purposes. The Secretary of Health and Environment is authorized to adopt rules and regulations to administer this section in coordination with the Division of Emergency Management and KDOT, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Other questions for the reviser? Not seeing any. Do I hear a motion to pass this out? Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we pass out HB 2630 favorably.
Second by Representative Ballard. Is there further discussion? Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I plan to vote against this as it's currently written for a couple reasons. First, we're talking about something that is not even happening or going to happen for quite a few years. So right now there's nowhere to transport it to. And that's the first reason. But the second and connected reason is I think this is a much larger discussion. Moving radioactive waste, high-level radioactive waste across the state of Kansas, frankly, is a bigger discussion than just how much they're going to pay in road fees or transportation fees. I think that it needs to be a much more expansive bill to set some guides for regulation of that. And then the third reason is, frankly, right now, I'm very wary to give KDHE any more authority than they've already got until we've determined the outcome of our constitutional amendment, which would give the legislature the ability to review and override excessive regulation. So for those reasons, I plan to oppose this bill, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further discussion? Representative Helgerson.
Well, I joined the representative because for two of the three, I have the same concerns because this isn't a program that's being used right now. We're setting up a bureaucracy to do this, but this is a huge issue. And I don't think we have the full significance yet. And I think that this is something that needs to be put together and given to the entire, that the governor comes in and says, this is what our plan is for handling it, and these are what the fee structure is. And just because we want to put this bill out because there are certain fees similar to a state that doesn't even agree with the transportation programs, I don't think that's the right way to handle it. So I'm going to vote in opposition to it also.
Representative Delberdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate comments from the previous two. And technically, I agree with you. But with that, I've got more of a technical amendment, if you will. And with the chairman's permission, while it's being passed out, I'd like to explain it.
Do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like I say, it's more of a technical amendment. It's cleaning up some language on it. It does a strikeout on some of the agencies, but it really simply specifies who establishes the fees that are opposed within. It's not changing anything, but rather establishes who it is and that the fees cannot exceed certain amounts.
Is there a second for your second by Representative Francis? Is there further discussion on the Representative Francis?
Just asking the carrier of the amendment, is this an attempt to resolve some of the concerns that the Department of Health and Environment had, or is this separate from that?
Can you please repeat the question?
I know we had neutral testimony and they had some concerns, I thought, about the legislation as it was proposed. Is any of this to deal with some of those concerns that they had, the Department of KDHE?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, every one of these amendments corresponds to the testimony and concerns that were raised yesterday by KDHE.
So there's going to be more than one amendment? No.
This is the only amendment. But there's a couple of balloon items on it.
Okay. Thanks.
Representative Francis, did you have some additional?
I don't think it's pertinent. No, I'm fine.
Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, Representative Delberdang, you may close.
I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Delberdang to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. So we're back on the bill, House Bill 2630 as amended. Any further questions? Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I do agree with what some of the prior representatives has had, that this is probably a very big issue and it may not hurt to let it kind of set out there for a while and get a little bit more attention so we know exactly what we're dealing with. I think it is important that we pass this amendment so that we're always moving the ball forward. Someday it's going to be an issue. So it's good to get the ball started. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very new to legislature. This is my first term, but what I've noticed is that once we have addressed something, it's very hard for us to come back around and look at it again because the institutional knowledge becomes, oh, we've already dealt with that. And so I'm afraid if we put this bill on the books, some future legislature, when they're actually faced with this problem, say, oh, they already figured that out 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and they won't give it the hard look that I really think it means. So I absolutely respect what the previous representative's trying to communicate, and I would agree with it in a perfect, well, it wouldn't be a perfect world if we were all here 20 years from now. We need to keep the new blood flowing. But in a perfect world where we had perfect institutional knowledge and we knew that this was just sticking a pin in the issue and we had to come back around to it, but I'm afraid we won't if we put it in statute right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further comments or questions? Seeing
Mr. Chairman, I
none-
have a comment.
Yes. Representative Hobson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just have to agree with my good friend from Representative Francis with respect to we need to get the ball rolling. I mean, of course, it's not an issue now, but eventually someday it will be. At least we need to take a first step, making sure that our state is heading in the right direction. So with that, I'm going to support the bill. Thank you.
Any other comments from online? Hearing none. Representative Hoheisel,
Thank you.
you may renew your motion.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, I move we pass out HB 2630 as amended. Did you second?
Okay, it was seconded by Representative Francis. So I'm sorry, I was checking on that. Did you move your
Yes, sir. Did you
motion?
want me to remove my motion? I move that we pass out HB 2630 as amended.
Okay. Thank you. You've heard the motion by Representative Hoheisel to pass House Bill 2630 favorably as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Motion fails. Okay, we have one more bill to take a look at, House Bill 2633. Revisor Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, House Bill 2633 would provide for the city of Hutchinson and city of Topeka license plates. Royalty payments for the Hutchinson license plate would go to support the Hutch Rec Foundation. City of Topeka royalty payments will be used to support the Friends of Topeka Zoo. These license plates are subject to KSA-141, which requires initial issuance of 250 plates and design costs for up to $5,000. That will be the responsibility of the cities as the sponsoring organization. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
You have any questions? Anybody have any questions for the revisor? Seeing none, is there a motion? Representative Seibert? Okay, is there a second? Representative Hoheisel, second. Is there discussion? Representative Seibert, you have an amendment.
Some concerns about it, and there was maybe permission or copyright deals, and with that, you have the amendment.
Have we got the, okay, pass the amendment out. Is there a second to the amendment?
Questions on it?
Representative Hoheisel, second.
Mr. Chair, if I may ask a question of it.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it just striking the Topeka license plate out? Is that what we're doing?
Right.
Okay.
Basically, that was the second part of that. There was some question on whether there was copyright rules. I think the president or CEO of the zoo would rather see it go a different way, and so it'd probably be best to be discussed at another time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else have any other questions? I could try to answer, but it's pretty simple at this time.
Are there any questions for the maker of the amendment? Has everyone had a chance to take a look at that? See no further questions. Representative, you may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked to pass out House Bill 2633
This will be your amendment.
as amended.
No, this is your.
Oh, just the amendment.
Just the
I move my amendment.
Okay, you've heard the motion to amend by Representative Seibert. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. So we're back on the bill as amended. Is there further discussion or questions? Seeing none, Representative Seibert, you may move your.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 2633 favorable for passage as amended.
You've heard the motion. Pass House Bill 2633 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Committee, thank you for your work. We We do have a hearing tomorrow. So I will look forward to seeing you then. With that, we are adjourned.